most of the time, there is a voice in your head that comments and has opinions and viewpoints and interpretations about what's going on in your life. I call that the voice in the head. For most humans, that is completely involuntary. They don't even know that they have a voice in the head that never stops talking. Most of the time, silently in your head. At other times, it may even shout something out, so it wants to be heard. And so, if you walk in the street, you will find most people look fairly sane. They're not talking to themselves, it seems, because they're not talking out aloud. But if you listened into everybody's head, you would be amazed of how noisy the inside of every human is. It's like these radio stations where the people talk in an excited voice. They go on and on. If you go to a foreign country and you don't know what they're talking about, you might think this must be extremely important. But if you can understand what they're saying, you realize it's completely meaningless. It's just noise. So a significant part of what happens in your mind, the larger part, is actually just superfluous noise. Thinking is a wonderful ability, a wonderful tool. If used rightly, it is an instrument that causes dysfunction and misery for millions on the planet, unhappiness for millions on the planet, if thinking is not used, but if you are used by thought. So when humans say, I think, in most cases, that's actually not true because they have no control over their thinking. It's a compulsive and involuntary. And they are so identified with these thought processes, they don't even know that they are in the grip of their thought processes because they are so identified, they become their thought processes. If you look at whenever you feel unhappiness, this is a generic term, unhappiness in whatever form. Unhappiness can arise as irritation, can arise as anger, can arise as even boredom is a form of unhappiness, sadness, all kinds of states that they don't feel pleasant, unhappiness, and usually they are attributed to a life situation, something that's going on in your life. Whenever you feel irritation arising, anger arising, upset in whatever form, ask yourself, is this caused by the situation, or is it caused by what my mind is telling me about the situation? And in 95% of cases, you will find that the mental commentary that argues and complains about something that's going on, but should not be going on, but it is, but shouldn't be, and the gap between what is and what the mind says should be or should not be, that gap is the arising of unhappiness and misery, or as the Buddha called suffering. It arises in the gap between the isness of things in this moment and the arguing with the isness of things in this moment, imposing a narrative on it that says, no, this should not be. I'm not talking about situations where you can take action to change it. There are certain situations where action is possible and necessary. Fine. But even if action is possible and necessary at this very moment, it still is as it is. Then you can take action. But this moment is as it is. So when you leave, or when you allow this moment to be as it is because you recognize the inevitability of is, this seems so obvious, but it's not obvious to most humans, the inevitability of what is already the case now. And if you can internally align yourself with this inevitable now, The next moment is a different thing, but when the next moment comes, it's now, of course. There's no next moment except as a thought in the head. Where is the future? You've never experienced it, you can't. Impossible. And yet, humans think about it more than the present moment. They want to get to the future because they don't want what is. They believe some kind of liberation or fulfillment will come next, always missing the isness of things. So, if unhappiness arises, examine, does it come? Is it caused by the situation I'm in, or is it caused by how my mind is interpreting the situation? So the cessation of compulsive and involuntary thinking could be described as the essence of spiritual awakening. The cessation of compulsive thinking. Thinking is addictive for most humans. Almost every human, except those that have started to disidentify from thinking, are addicts. And the greatest addiction is the addiction to thinking, not to fruitful thinking, not to creative thinking, not to thinking that actually solves problems, but to thinking that is futile, that is destructive, that instead of solving problems, creates problems, thinking that creates anxiety, that creates fear, that creates grievances, that creates regret, that creates all kinds of dysfunctional states, that creates enemies because it's egoic thinking. That is what needs to come to an end. And when that comes to an end, then real thinking, constructive, fruitful, creative thinking can happen. Thinking is an amazing thing. And we haven't even started. We're just beginning to touch on what is possible by using the human mind. A time will come, I don't predict the future very often, but when humans can create through thought. Already, to some extent, you can do that. You can manifest things through thought. Many of you have already done it. It's not an answer to your state of dissatisfaction, because so we need to go. There's something more fundamental than that needs to be done first, that needs to be realized first, and then you can create. But it will no longer be the ego that's creating, but something deeper from within you will be creating through your mind. But so the mind is powerful, a powerful creator. As Course in Miracles says, every thought creates form on some level. Thought is creative. But more importantly, is to access the dimension that is deeper than thought. And then thought can be in the service of universal intelligence. And then you are the intermediary. You are that through which universal intelligence creates. Your mind is that through which universal intelligence creates. So, the cessation of thinking is something that you need to invite into your life, not by suppressing thinking, but by letting go of resistance. One of the quickest portals into cessation of thinking is letting go of resistance to the present moment, inner resistance, to whatever appears in your consciousness at this moment, as whatever, and it changes all the time. One situation, another situation, people, events come into the field of consciousness. And as we mentioned the other day, most humans are in an almost continuous state of not wanting what is, or rather wanting something else that seems to be more important at some future point. And we need to recognize the dysfunction of that state of consciousness. And one of the greatest spiritual practices is what I call to make the present moment your friend. To make the present moment your friend is to say yes internally to whatever arises in this moment.